Emily here, teaching classic literature to you all. Thank you for joining me today. Today I'm going to talk about who were the great Romantic poets. I'm going to read you a few samples of their poetry, show you a few of my books, talk a little bit about the Romantic movement in Romantic poetry, and get into a little bit about the Enlightenment period or the Great Romantics, which we call the Big Six. So if you haven't subscribed, please do so you don't miss any future videos, me talking about classic literature for teaching, for writing, for studying at uni, book reviews, all on classic, everything classic you will find on this channel. So please subscribe and let's get started. So who were the Big Six? We can talk about who are the Big Six. We can talk about Romantic poetry. First thing I wanted to say is I'm not talking about Romantic poetry like Shakespeare's sonnets or love romance, okay? When we talk about who are the Romantics or Romanticism, we are not talking about romantic love. So the first thing you need to know, because many of my students have never really known that, poetry is not my favorite. It's not my biggest specialty. I'm more interested in classic novels and the great books. But I do believe it's important to read a little bit of poetry every day, because reading a little poetry every day will keep you motivated and inclined to read the classics. Poetry has healing properties. Like, it's been studied by researchers that reading poetry can actually help your immune system. So there's a lot of advantage to reading poetry. But overall, we're talking about the poetry of the Romantic era. We're talking, when we think of the Romantics, we think English, late 1700s, early 1800s, maybe to about 1830. And probably Romanticism was the greatest change in the history of poetry or literature that really influenced a whole new kind of writing style. So the Romantics, the original, we're talking about William Blake, William Wordsworth, John Keats, Lord Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley. And we are talking about, for example, and we're talking about how their style of writing was a break off from what was the norm. So the Romantic poets, Romanticism, comes from, when you think of the word romance or romantics, the first part of that is think Roman. So the Romantics wanted to create a new way of writing that kind of stemmed from the Enlightenment period, but also rebelled against it a little bit. They wanted to get back to the graceful, beautiful, free, nature-inspired poets from the early Roman Augustan era. Stemming back to ancient time and the ancient Romans. So when the whole society was different, with the aspirations to beautiful, nature-inspired, free thinking, free acting, free feeling poetry, where it kind of, some of that came from. So the Enlightenment period, this was probably one of the biggest movements. But we also see in the Enlightenment period, we have it viewed that man was more of a machine. Man was all about reason and logic and structure. And so but the Romantics came in and they wanted their type of poetry to be more inspiration based, more about feeling and emotion and free thinking. Romanticism was more about, instead of educating for a class or educating due to societal expectation, my hair is bugging me, we have being educated to not only just study, instead of, Enlightenment, it was study what you're supposed to study. With Romanticism, it was studying what you want to study, right? So it's more about freedom, more freedom, writing more about feelings and emotions and deeper meaning, instead of writing more about a more scientific topics, and man is more of an object and a machine and a producer of thing, instead of as a free feeling being with deep intent, emotions, and connections to nature and or the spirit world. So that is where we get, Lord Byron and John Keats and William Wordsworth and Percy Bysshe Shelley and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, I forgot to mention him, all the top six, where they wanted to start writing a different kind of poetry. And so there are specific facets of this that I bullet pointed that would be important for you to know if you're in a poetry class or you're writing about the Romantic poets. So I will name them off. So I wrote down the most important ones. So when we look at the Romantic period with the great poets, we have less scientific inquiry and exploration of logic topics to more open-minded, right? So less science, more nature, right there. That's the bottom line. The second one we have is more possibility. And this type of poetry and this type of thinking is more possibility for choices, more individualism, more human beings as sacred, creatures, and not just these, machine producing, even industrialization, we can go into, that's a whole other topic, can kind of stems from the origins of the Enlightenment period. But these Romantic poets were kind of anti all of that. Let's just put it that way. They're anti all of that. So they were the free thinkers, the free spirited ones, and their poetry really changed the course of even in literature, of even that bled into novels, even, for example, of how books and literature were written, poetry included, and or influenced society greatly. Okay, so we have number 3, we have more free verse and less rhyming. So in poetry in particular, right? So older poetry was very stiff, very rhyming. If you really want to study poetry, styles of poetry and types of poetry, if you get into all of that, rhyming and free verse is more, it doesn't have to rhyme. It can be more inspirational. It can take any pattern it wants. And in some of the ones I read, you might see that. I tend to always kind of gravitate toward the rhyming ones because they make more sense in my head, but that's just me. Number 4, we have the poetry of the Romantic period was more simplistic and easy to understand. So it was more relatable by the readers. Not so like Old English, like the Fairy Queen, Edmund Spenser, that was technically considered, poetry. Like, wow, get a translator dictionary for that. But more things that human beings at the time could relate to, that they experienced in life, that they see and hear and touch and taste and feel. And it was easier to derive meaning from it in this way when the new poetry was written in this manner. Number 5, the Romantic poetry to be enjoyed by all, not just the elite. So these big 6 were writing for the standard population. You did not have to be, Harvard educated or higher upper class to enjoy works of poetry, to read or even understand works of poetry. From the smallest on the social status of human to the highest, this was poetry for all, which was a big, big step. This was a big deal at the time. So this really sort of morphed the style of poetry from that point on, from the point of the Romantics on, to something that can be relatable to all. And we get to number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Number 6, more individualism and self-exploration of identity. So poems were written more about individual aspects of the human plight, the human existence, human suffering, human emotion, exploration of each human is individual and unique. Not humans were all lumped together in a class, like all lions aren't lumped together in a class, like they're just lions, they're just wolves, they're just cows, they're just crickets. Human beings were separate now, individual, thinking, feeling, being, doing, living beings that had something unique to contribute to the world. and that differentiated him or her from another human being. So that is kind of where the Romantics in their poetry were going. And you do see mostly a huge connection to nature in most of the these Romantics poems. So it's really interesting if you really want to get in there and analyze some of these poems. My last point here is the inclusion of the sublime, right? So this is what I was talking about with the nature. So in Gothic literature, we have the sublime, where we have awe, intrigue, and terror, beauty and terror in the same thing. Well, there's a lot of the sublime in the Romantics' great poetry, meaning how man faces off with the brutal and gorgeous and overwhelmingly powerful aspects of nature. Man against nature, man with nature, man and nature one, man and nature in conflict. The frightening parts of the weather and the scenes, the settings and the oceans and the wind, and how it made somebody feel intrigued or terrorized or challenged or awed. So a whole bunch of the sublime in the poetry by the Romantics as well. So all in all, we're not talking romantic love poetry. We're talking a completely different evolution of a type of poetry and a type of being and living and viewing people societally and culturally during this time period that kind of came out of Enlightenment, tied back into the early Romans, is where we get the Romantics. So I just wanted to give that little bit. I'm going to read a little bit of this poetry here. What I have here is my gorgeous big green 100% leather bound gold edge pages, my Easton Press edition, my poems of John Keats. You do collect, I do collect Easton Press books, the leather bound editions. They have that smell. I don't have a lot of poetry. I mostly have novels. They all have these satin interiors. I'm going to read a little bit of Yeats here. And actually, this book is so gorgeous. And it has the green themed illustrations, of course, because he was Irish, right? I believe. I'm pretty sure he's Irish, right? Yeah, I think so. So, like here we have the very first poem I just glanced upon, the Song of the Happy Shepherd. We already have nature brought in, right? We have the woods of Arcady are dead, and over is their antique joy. Of old the world on dreaming fed, gray truth is now her painted toy. Yet still she turns her restless head, but oh, sick children of the world, of all the many changing things in dreary dancing past us world. To the cracked tune that Kronos sings, words alone are certain good. Where are now the warring kings, word-be mockers by the rude? Where are now the warring kings? An idle word is now their glory. So now we're moving from battle and logic to words and poetry and feeling, is what you see that theme in this poem. By the stammering schoolboy who said, reading some entangled story, the kings of the old time are dead. The wandering earth herself may be only a sudden flaming word. In clanging space, a moment heard, troubling the endless reverie. So that is the Song of the Happy Shepherd. One of my favorites is When You Are Old. It's a very short one. When you are old and gray and full of sleep, and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read and dream of the soft look your eyes had once, and of their shadows deep. How many loved your moments of glad grace, and loved your beauty with love false or true? But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you, and loved the sorrows of your changing face. Such a beautiful poem about aging. And bending down beside the glowing bars, murmur a little sadly how love has fled, and paced upon the mountains overhead, and hid his face amid a crowd of stars. So here we have stars, mountains, the human aging, pilgrim, free spirit, soul. See what I'm talking about, the themes here of Romantic poetry I just discussed. Here's another one I love. The Two Trees. Beloved, gaze in thine own heart. The holy tree is growing there. From joy the holy branches start, and all the trembling flowers they bear, the changing colors of its fruit, have dowered the stars with merry light. The surety of its hidden root has planted quiet in the night. The shaking of its leafy head has given the waves their melody, and made my lips and music wed, murmuring a wizard song for thee. There, through bewildered branches, go winged loves borne on a gentle strife, tossing and tossing to and fro the flaming circle of our life. So much like deep philosophical introspection is what's happening in this romantic era of poetry. I think it's absolutely fascinating and I absolutely love it. It really makes you feel like, think about your human plight, you know, your human purpose on the earth. So this book is gorgeous. Lots of poems. My favorite. Okay, let's look at another one so I can read a few of these others. I have the Pocketbook of Romantic Poetry with some of our favorite Big Six I just discussed. I'm going to read a little one here by William Blake. Which one do I want to read? Let's read The Echoing Green. The sun does rise and make happy the skies. The merry bells ring to welcome the spring. The skylark and thrush, the birds of the bush, sing louder around to the bells' cheerful sound, while our sports shall be seen on the echoing green. Now, this is one that does have more of that rhyming, but they do not all. I just gravitate toward those. Old John with white hair does laugh away his care, sitting under the oak along the old folk. They laugh at our play, and soon they all say, such were the joys, when we all girls and boys in our youth time were seen on the echoing green. Till the little ones, weary, no more can be merry. The sun does descend, and our sports have to end. Round the laps of their mothers, many sisters and brothers, like birds in their nest, are ready for rest, and sport no more seen on the darkening green. So this one is a little dark. I mean, again, we see that aging was very common in these romantic poems, because when we age, we reflect back on our lives, what we've lived, loved, lost, appreciation for their human existence, how our small little piece of life was, how it relates to the giant, massive natural world. This one, you know, you can interpret might be about children dying or about aging from child to adulthood. Next, we have a little poem by William Wordsworth. I traveled among unknown men. I traveled among unknown men in the lands beyond the sea. Nor England did I know till then. What have I bore to thee? The past, that melancholy dream, nor will I quit the shore a second time, for still I seem to love thee more and more. Loving the shore, loving the natural world, reflecting on days gone by. Among thy mountains did I feel the joy of my desire, and she I cherished turned her wheel besides an English fire. The mornings showed thy nights concealed, the bowers where Lucy played, and thine too in the last green field that Lucy's eyes surveyed. Another theme of maybe death, passing, reflecting on when you're young. So I think it's so much fun to interpret poetry. If you're doing a class on poetry or you get to do an analysis of a poem, that is so much fun. And you can tie in themes and history, and you can take your own perspective on it, and it gives a lot of more creativity in writing about poetry analysis. So that is the William Wordsworth. Let's see, we have here Percy Blythe Shelley. Mont Blanc is a very famous poem. The everlasting universe of things. flows through the mind and rolls its rapid waves, now dark, now glittering, now reflecting gloom, now lending splendor where the secret springs, the source of human thought in tribute brings, of waters with a sound but half its own, such a feeble brook we oft assume. In the wild woods among the mountains lone, where waterfalls around it leap forever, where woods and winds contend, and a vast river over its rocks ceaselessly bursts and raves. See how every poem I've read by every one of the romantics brings in nature and ties it into man. Thou ravine of Arve, deep, deep ravine, thou many-colored, many-voiced vale, over whose pines and crags and caverns sail fast cloud shadows and sunbeams, awful scene, where power and likeness of the Arve comes down from the ice gulfs and the gird his secret throne. Bursting through these mountains like the flame of lightning through the tempest, thou does lie. Thy giant brood of pines around these clinging childrens of elder time, in whose devotion the chainless winds still come and ever came, to drink their odors and their mighty swinging, to hear an old and solemn harmony of days gone by. Ah, beautiful. Love it. Who else do we have on here? Lord Byron. Did I read anything by Samuel Taylor Coleridge? No. Let's see if I can read something by him. He was one of the big six. Sam, where are you? William, there he is. Kubla Khan. That's a famous one you might have heard of. Yeah, he wrote Kubla Khan. Let's go read a little Kubla Khan. Kubla Khan, or A Vision in a Dream, a Fragment, by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree. Now, stopping right there. It's just me, or when I heard Xanadu, does that make you think of Greece? Was there a song called Xanadu with John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John? Xanadu, I don't know. Okay, back to poetry. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alf, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground, with walls and towers were girdled round, and there were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree, fragrant tree, and here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. But oh, that deep romantic chasm which slanted down the green hill, athwart a cattern cover, a savage place, as holy and enchanted as ever beneath a waning moon, and haunted by woman wailing to her demon lover. Ooh, what's a demon lover? And from this chasm with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast thick pants were breathing, a mighty fountain momentarily was forced, amid whose swift half intermittent burst huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail, or chafy grain beneath the thresher's flail. And mid these dancing rocks at once, and ever it flung up momentarily the sacred river, 5 miles meandering with a mazy motion through wood and dale and sacred river. Oh, so if you want to write an essay on the big six, or the romanticism or romantic poetry that stems from kind of a rebounding of the Enlightenment period, I would choose a theme of the use of nature in romantic poetry, or nature versus man, or man and nature as one in romantic poetry. And I would either choose one of these big six: William Blake, Lord Byron, John Keats, William Wordsworth, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and just focus on that theme with their poems, or pick one poem from each of these six that all show the theme you're talking about, and do a comparative analysis and bring that into your paper. So that is how I would use romantic poetry and the big six if I was at uni. If you are not and are like me, I highly recommend you read at least a poem or two every evening before bed. It calms the mind. It allows you to distract yourself from problems. It allows you to think about more beautiful things. It can actually nature and poetry has been shown to actually improve serotonin and lower your cortisol. So a little bit of poetry every day if you want to become more literary articulate. And yeah, so there's some good starting points. Let me know which one you like, or if you want to hear more, I can do more videos on poetry. Thanks so much for watching. Give this a thumbs up, and I will see you in another video.